In times of trauma and adversity, we must create space for connection by sharing a story of hope. Welcome to Stories of Hope Worldwide, hosted by Kerry Atherton. This podcast shares inspiring stories of individuals who have faced significant challenges and emerged stronger, offering hope and resilience to listeners all over the world. Join Kerry, the founder of Stories of Hope, every week to hear these remarkable journeys and find strength to overcome your adversity. Now, let's listen in to this week's conversation.
Welcome to another episode of Stories of Hope Worldwide. I'm Kerry Atherton and I'm your host. And today's guest is Brendan Neal. We're going to be talking about hope after divorce. Welcome, Brendan.
G'day, Kerry. Great to see you.
Great to have you on. I've been wanting to get somebody on to talk about this topic for so long, and you're the first person that's been willing. So I'm so grateful because it's a topic that so many people go through, and it's a topic that so many people also don't really want to talk about. Brendan, you mentioned to me that this is your 8th Christmas as a single dad. We are recording this 2 days out from Christmas, and I know that it's such a hard time for people that have broken down in their relationship, separated families, people that have become divorced, people that are lonely. But when I was sitting in my AA meeting actually last night, when the meeting closed and the chairman was speaking to the struggling alcoholics out there, he said, just remember that Christmas is just another day. And that's a good perception, isn't it, for people that think that the day is just going to be too hard?
Yeah, look, any of those big significant times of the year or calendar of the year and events, there's certainly things that trigger lots of memories for people. And so for people who, have gone through some sort of loss or, in the case of the people that I speak with a lot through a divorce, certainly these times of year bring all that to the front or front of mind. And you're right, like as the person at the meeting said last night, it is just one day. However, there's a lot of importance and a lot of tradition that goes around that day. And it also brings back lots of memories of things that, we all had in the past and things that have changed. And for some people that can bring on quite a lot of loss or a feeling of loss. And it can also really heighten the feelings that go around, what some people term as a failure in life, as opposed to framing it as a change in life. Yeah.
I love that. That's really great. And we're going to talk more about all of that later. What would you say to the man? I know you do a lot of work with men, and obviously you help women as well, but you've written a program for divorced dads. What would you say to the dad who is contemplating next year? Because that's another big one, isn't it? When we come to the end of the year and think, what's next year going to be like?
Yeah, sure. So looking at the year ahead and how life is going to balance out. Look, I think what any jolt in life does, typically we don't choose a lot of things that happen to us, especially as we get a bit older. We sort of stay in control of how our life pans out, and we have plans or at least an idea. And even people who aren't, very consciously directed sort of have an understanding of where their life is taking them and the sort of journey they're going to travel on or the path they're going to travel down. So when these things occur, and specifically I see with men in getting divorced, the statistics show us that in Western worlds, over 75% of divorces are initiated by women. So yeah. So when it comes around to that time, when a relationship finally breaks down, quite typically for a woman, they've already gone through a bit of a grieving process themselves or a change process themselves. So they've withdrawn themselves, at least mentally, and quite often physically from a relationship. And, I'll throw myself in there. Us men are usually slow to the party. We don't realize sometimes the extent of what's occurred and the depth of, feelings of a partner or your wife. And when it has come around to that point, if communication's been quite poor, if this hasn't been addressed through, the time preceding separating, then quite often men are in a little bit more shock. And the woman who has, if they have initiated this process, they're already mentally quite prepared and have a bit of a plan in their head of what's going to occur. So, quite often when I meet men, they're on the back foot. They're
Yeah.
going, something you'd be familiar with is that sort of grief cycle, of something that loses. So, those initial responses of sort of anger and denial, um, sort of then roll into, that negotiation phase where a man's going to say, hey, I'll do anything and I'll change my ways, whatever it takes. And a whole heap of, bargaining like that.
Yeah.
And then quite often a sadness or depression sets in. And, before there's some acceptance there finally. And by that stage, typically a man has taken a lot longer to go through that process if it has been the woman's decision from the start, because they've already prepared themselves and, that they also have to, go through that same similar process. Yeah. And that we can all bounce in and out of those different stages all the time. So, for a man looking ahead, like after Christmas, let's say you survive that day and you get through New Year and everything. Yeah, certainly New Year's are times when people, sort of take stock of what's happened the year before and they look forward to the future and sort of say, okay, I'm going to make these changes or I'm going to do something that at least puts myself in a slightly better position to how I've felt more recently. Yeah, so I'd certainly say, for any men who are sort of concerned about what happens after Christmas and how their year ahead looks, yeah, it's just be kind to yourself to start off with. And then certainly there's a whole road to rebuild yourself and, really, especially if you have children, to reestablish a new life with them that's going to be different. And certainly, create an environment that is going to really serve you well and be kind to yourself. And one that, you're going to, if you do share children with an ex, there's certainly a lot of interaction you're going to have over the years ahead.
Yeah.
Pretty much all you're going to remember, or I remember the advice I was given by someone who is a lawyer, however, has nothing to do with family law. Right. And he shared his advice or his, I guess, his wisdom from observing people. And he said, look, years down the track, all you're going to remember is how you conducted yourself through this really hard time. And I think that's something really important to keep in mind is that, as angry as you can be or as upset as you can be and sad, that other person that you shared children with or shared part of your life with, they're still going to be around in your life as the mother of your children, if I'm talking to men. Yeah. And, really it is a case of, okay, take a breath, pull all the hurt out of your own soul and don't displace it back on that person that at one stage you really loved and decided to have children with.
Oh, great words. I love that you said what you will remember is how you conducted yourself.
That was really good advice that I was given, and I've shared that with many people and I've seen it. Yeah
and I see it all the time too in the counselling room.
Yeah.
Brendan, with those statistics where you said 75% of marriages end through the woman ends
initiates
the separation. What are the specific reasons? Is there any statistics around that?
Yeah, look, there's quite a lot of different research that's gone into that, and through different relationships and the study of what you term successful people staying together as opposed to people not staying together. Yeah. And look, one of the most significant things I've seen, and that sort of in the work that I've done and the study that I've done, is that really a communication and understanding is sort of at the key of it. It sounds very cliche. However, a lot of people view communication as a sport. It's sort of like, if I'm...
You did, I did, you did that.
Yeah, I've got another 2 points on you because And, that rightful indignation of like, well, doesn't everyone think like me and this is the moral code and you're breaking it and having to, and wanting to prove that. and then having, being able to share that with friends or family or something and, recruit other people onto your cause. So, that is a thing that, is sort of irrelevant to a certain extent. And the more that I did that research and talking and certainly reading people who've studied significantly in those areas, the more you realize that so much of your behavior is governed by really significant and impactful moments that have come right through your younger life and childhood. So all those first significant things you've experienced, the love of a family and your relationship with parents and people who've been close to you growing up, through to your first loves. And, if you've had a marriage, your first marriage and everything, all those very significant things, they sort of set the precedent for how we respond to things in the future. So you hear a lot of people you hear a lot of people use that word a lot now, triggers. I've got these triggers and these things. And, ultimately what they're saying is that they've experienced some sort of a behavior or a stimulus from a person. And when they say trigger a response, it actually takes them back to a cognitive pathway or a learnt behavior we have that is probably formed like many years ago and has nothing to do with the person who's triggered me. So we hear this quite often when people start new relationships after they've been married for some time and their new person in their life may say something inadvertently or do some sort of behavior with no malice or intent behind it. However, that person receives it and compares it to something that's been significant in their life previously, and they attach a meaning to it. Yeah. And often that's a negative meaning. Yeah. So, that comes up and then it's straight away, it's the blame. I can look in your eyes and I can go, you're just like them, Yeah,
through a real distorted
I've seen this before.
Yeah, that's very insightful. And I totally agree with that. A lot of people I see come to me in their middle age and everything's hit the ground, rock bottom, broken down relationship, often substance misuse, and it's all as a result, often as unresolved childhood trauma.
Yeah. It was so interesting. Like, for me as like you said, a middle-aged person, like a lot of people don't learn or don't appear to learn a lot of new things. So for me, it was such a bit of a journey and an experience, after separating with, the boy's mum. And I guess for quite some time there, I was sort of like, I would say that I wasted a lot of time unnecessarily, like in a bit of pain and everything. Things weren't great. However, they weren't adversarial or aggressively, a terrible environment. It was just typical of a lot of relationships where, just trying and, from both sides, there was just these little barriers that sort of, the feeling sort of just dissipated and life went a bit quiet, around the edges. Yeah. And it's pretty easy when you throw a couple of kids in the middle and, the mum takes on a whole heap of responsibilities and fathers take on a whole heap of different responsibilities. And, often that connection point that you had is just a little bit disjointed and it's not as real between the people. Certainly if you let that happen and you don't recognize it, and then if you don't know how to connect that back together, meaningfully rather than just like, oh, if I take you to a nice dinner, will that make it all nice again? And we'll have a date night. Yeah. That's great. There's a lot of life in between those moments, right? So, yeah.
And a lot of men aren't great at talking. And I think the thing is, isn't it? Women like to talk and they want to feel that they've been heard. And from working with lots of men, they listen quickly and then, oh yeah, I've got it. And it goes both ways, I guess, but unless someone actually feels heard, nothing's going to be resolved, is it?
Yeah. And I think you would probably see this a lot where a man will dive straight into solution mode pretty quick.
Yeah.
I'm sure when you're pointing things out to them, they're like, oh, yeah. How do I just exit that?
How do I fix it?
Put on this new behavior.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Brendan, I'm going to chuck you an absolute curveball question here.
Yeah, sure.
In your opinion, and from what you've seen, I mean, I've done a lot of work myself with people that have struggled in this area and come to realise the damage that it did play. What do you think the role or how destructive is a pornography addiction in a marriage?
It's interesting. It's I wouldn't say I've got a lot of direct experience at dealing with people with that. I think one of the things that we do, the perceptions that we do have is that it's only men that look at pornography.
Yeah.
And, that is a fallacy and that I've come across as well.
Notice I didn't say men.
Yeah. The general perception is that, hey, this is
right.
occurring in that.
Yeah.
I think that anything that replaces the desire for physical intimacy with a person that you hold true in your life can sort of reduce the desire to be really connected with that person. And I think that any person doesn't really like the idea of their partner or someone they really like of fantasizing over another body or another human instead of themselves. So I often talk to men along the lines of like, I've done this workshop and it's like why my wife has stopped sleeping with me. And
okay.
Yeah, and look, part of the thing behind that is similar to you were saying about the communication and not listening, like women wanting to be heard and seen. Yeah. And it's one thing to be at work or be away from your partner and the family for some time working or something, and to come home and go, oh baby, like I really want you, and I'm lusting for you, or I love really want to have you in my arms. Yeah. As opposed to like just coming in like that with a strong desire, as opposed to actually connecting and saying, hey, it's you that I actually want. So if you're coming home all fired up and, your wife has like been dealing with kids and all these other domestic things and running a house and making all these decisions independently, and then you're just coming in all ramped up because you had these thoughts during the day of things, or, so I'd imagine that that's not a desirable thing for a woman at any stage. Like you want to be desired for who you are and what you are. So I think that probably brings up a real problem for a lot of couples if, you're hell-bent on just looking at a screen and looking at other people making love or doing things and then transferring that desire straight onto your partner because she's the one there. So,
and a lot of guys are actually surprised to hear that many women see that as a betrayal.
Yeah, because you think it's a harmless thing. And look, there's, I think it comes down to talking and everything as well. There's women I know who are quite okay with them looking at something and their man looking at something.
Yeah.
Yeah. However, there's still a really strong connection and desire of what they love in each other. I'm probably a bit more concerned around my sons and that access to content and everything. Yeah. And using that as this is a how-to guide.
Yeah, that's right. Or their perception of this is how women want to be treated and how they should be treated. And I did a lot of work in schools actually, and I wrote a program and I really covered this topic with young kids. And the average age around 5 or 6 years ago that boys were first viewing pornography then was around 9.
Yeah.
And they were just typing in, boobs or nude or something like that. And what they were exposed to in that first instance was hardcore pornography. And once those kids have got those images in their mind, they can't get them out of their mind. They're hardwired in there.
And they certainly, like we were saying before, things that happen early in your life and form those, neural pathways and connections and feelings do make quite an imprint. I think it's probably not too dissimilar to, I'm beyond middle age now, I'm a bit older. And, for our young days when, magazines were around, right?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And you would have seen a level of something, however, nothing like you can pull up on your phone now for free. Like, you had to navigate that whole thing of like, where do you source the magazine from or which kid steals it from someone.
And like you said, it was pretty tame compared to what kids are exposed to.
Yeah, I think it had the same effect. That was as much as you could see, right?
Really? No, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah. However, it wasn't constant. Like it's on tap now. There's probably something.
Brendan, in your own marriage, when did you first notice the cracks? Because you mentioned before that guys often don't really realise that there's a problem until their wives are like, hey, we're almost done and that stone wall's really set in. When did you first notice the cracks? And then I'm going to ask you, when did your wife first notice the cracks?
Well, I'm certain for herself, if you were to speak with her, she would have, had opinions and noticed something a lot earlier than myself because, I was in that very statistic normal range that, it was certainly, she was more far advanced in her thoughts of like breaking up or, finishing the marriage and choosing to lead a happier life. And I think I fell into a space where a lot of men do, where I see them do. And it's sort of like, you can call it some sort of stoic sort of, approach to life. And it was like, okay, well, if this is suffering, I can put up with it and I can, sacrifice these things because I've got some kids and a wife and, I've got to provide and, maintain some sort of stability. However, during that period of time, I guess things were sort of less than ideal of how certainly I wanted to live and how the boy's mum wanted to live as well. And, for me, that's often gauged on just an affection, fun environment. And, for me, life was always like, that friendliness and also a lot of affection as well. And a bit of excitement thrown in. So, regardless of what you're doing and, you don't need money to have all that stuff in your daily life and just that putting effort into the daily things to, every week you've got something that sparks up the week a little and shares and mixes with each other and everything. And I noticed that, that had sort of more dissipated. And, certainly, I guess the level of conversation and everything sort of became frostier or just lost that affection, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was for quite some time. And then
When you say quite some time, how long are you talking before?
Oh, it depends. My perception's a bit warped, I think, looking back on it, because then I can sort of say, oh, for this massive amount of time for, many, many, many years, it wasn't as good as, how I'd live now or how looking back at it, hey, if I had this insight and knowledge that I have now, I would have made some different changes back then and would have improved certain things and addressed them, right? Yeah. So I sort of see that, for myself, there's probably a few points that happened, 5, 6, 7 years before we separated that, I certainly could have, looking back at it now, addressed or at least brought up and just talked and thrown it up in the air. And that's probably the hardest thing for couples, I think, because that also threatens, just to question it and to choose to talk about things can threaten a lot of people. And because it can erode the trust or you feel like the foundation you've got could be jeopardized. And especially if you've experienced that growing up in your childhood and you've seen your parents split up and, your perception of that was that, there's a lot of bad fallout and things weren't great. Or if you, even see that your parents stayed together and they've got a great relationship and you're not matching up to it. Yeah, you feel like you're failing in the eyes of your own family as well. Yeah, so there's lots of those little things that sort of hold you back. Yeah.
As you hear this story, what Kerry's discussing might be resonating strongly with you. Perhaps you've experienced something similar yourself and are looking for support. Kerry Atherton is an experienced counsellor and wellbeing coach and has private sessions available if you or someone you know needs some help. You don't have to deal with trauma, addiction, PTSD, and abuse alone. If you'd like to talk about today's episode or your own experiences, book a session with Kerry at empowerlifesolutions.com.au or check the link in the show notes and embrace a future filled with hope. Now back to the episode.
Yeah, you mentioned that sense of failure before when we first started talking. How prevalent is that? And I'm just talking about. I'm asking you specifically about men today only because you do a lot of work with men and you've got the Divorced Dads program. But for guys, how prevalent is that sense of failure? Because, I've been married for 38 years and my hubby and I would both say, it has not been easy. There's been many times, where we've really, stonewalled and had to try and come back together again. And I've been able to realise and understand that while he hasn't been able to be there for me in the emotional way that I have wanted, that his perception of caring for the family is going out and providing. And I think that that's something that often gets lost and missed by females along the way, that, yeah, the hubby's out working all the time and I might feel neglected over here, but the reality is that's the way that the husband is actually giving back to the family and trying to, support them is by going out and working and being the provider, the perception of that.
Yeah, I'll just share why I work with men. I think that
Yeah,
just to
okay.
start that off.
Yeah.
So initially, I guess what I went through and what I would call some needless suffering by myself was because I was just too scared to ask anyone, what was going on. I had some really good close friends, and they knew what was happening because we cohabitated for some time, which is not uncommon even after you break up.
Yeah.
And so those close to me knew that I wasn't happy and circumstances weren't great. And so I saw that as when we finally did move away from each other's company and everything. That like I said, I was on the back foot and I was a bit behind when all that occurred. After quite, over those next couple of years and everything, I had a few friends that went through similar circumstances, and I guess some friends of theirs, and for some reason, people defaulted to me and just asked me, like, "Hey, how did you get by with this?" And and ask a few other questions, some specific ones. A lot of them were emotional ones, as in, like, "Hey, how do I do this, and how do I set up a new place? And I've got kids and everything, and now I'm doing 100% of everything that
Yeah.
we shared before." Yeah, so all those things. Yeah, so I ended up sort of searching around a bit, and I do a lot of reading anyway. And I decided to go and do some study that's based overseas. It's in North America, and it's an accreditation for divorce coaching.
Oh, wow.
And so it's an international accreditation. So I went and studied that, as well as doing some psychology units just at uni up here, and just to do some undergraduate stuff as well. I studied before, however, I wanted to specifically know some basics around what makes us all tick and how things work. So that was a real key interest. And the reason why I sort of just singled out and working with men is that I don't think a lot of women would really want to or seek to talk to a guy like me about divorce after they're getting divorced. And I think, their friendship circles are far better than what most blokes are and the way they
Yeah,
communicate.
women
So
find it easier to open up to girlfriends, don't they? That's
yeah. And look, I would just have, I just would not like to, feel like have any woman feel like they're in a position of being told by another bloke what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I deal mostly with men, and because we don't, we're not the best at seeking that sort of help.
Oh, and isn't that great that guys came to you? Because I know how hard that is for men. I do a lot of work with men actually for different reasons. I've seen a lot of suffering of men that are close to me in my own life, and mental illness and depression, and that's what led me into working with men. And also when I was working in schools for 6 years, I worked with a lot of troubled boys and I ran a large mentoring program, and just seeing the effect that having a positive role model in their life made was just so life-changing. So I think it's awesome that guys felt that they could come to you first and talk about this stuff, because it would be very vulnerable to come to another guy and say, "Oh, emotionally, I'm really struggling." You've obviously possessed something, a safe space, where people feel like they can do that. So tell us about your program for the divorced dads.
Yeah, sure. Look, it's fairly straightforward in that I guess there's a few components to it, and I always wanted to keep it very practical. So the first component is pretty much survival mode. So it was born out of, like, what do I do? Quite typically I'm in a crappy little apartment or something that I'm renting. The kids are coming over for the first time this weekend or next week. I've got some stuff here. I don't know I did rely on their mum for providing all these parts of the household running. Now I'm doing what I normally do, and I'm going to have to fill in all these gaps. So it started off with that, what do you need to start surviving? How do you, intentionally set up a space and a new environment with your kids that you can both, you can all connect with, and also have it so that it's uniquely you and your kids. Because that's one thing that's very evident, is that it's an opportunity for you to create a new relationship with your children, and for you to certainly live exactly your philosophy on life. And, your children will be exposed to that. So there's very much that first survival hands-on stuff, like how do you cook, like what sort of stuff do you cook, and how do you also bring your kids on that journey, making it fun and having their input, and also raising up their ability to function in a different place as well, where they contribute to a new household.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were talking, because the fallout's huge, isn't it? It's not just the grief and loss for the couple, for the guy, for the dad that's broken up, but it's them trying to support their children emotionally through such a devastating time, as well as all the other stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Look, it really is a time that you have to step up, like both parents do. It's, for as much as you want to wallow in, some sadness and that, it's not going to help anyone around you. And the reality is, like, life keeps kicking on, and, hopefully no one's like, threatening your life or doing anything really crazy. However, you really have to sort of get on with just the basic stuff. So there's that survival component, and then there's this whole stability component of like, right, I've got over that little bit, and things are settling down. I've got into a decent financial routine as well, and I've got things under control now, or at least settling in that with that stability mode, so that life is getting to your new normal. And for your kids as well, in that case. And you're also starting to go, okay, how do we start embedding the things that we really want in life? All those little bits and pieces, because the fact is that without a really intentional guide to how we want to live, most of us just follow what the system is, or what's in front of us and what's easy. And we'll be guided by that. And you don't have to have like, a tinfoil hat on or anything. However, the reality is that, so many people are sucking us in different pathways and everything, whether how you spend your money, how you spend your time and everything. And they're just all competing for attention and everything. So, whether that be, watching a particular streaming service, or, consuming things in other ways, or just deciding this is how we have to live, you can throw all of that up in the air and start creating your new life. And that's where it comes on to like, sort of the next phase of that program, which is sort of how do you design that aspirational life and really center on the things that are going to make a difference for yourself and for your family, and looking at the impact you make on those around you. So, how do you not so much just give back, but how do you lead within a community by example, and also by the deeds you do? And, how does that benefit others? So it's really, these three components. It's about getting back on your feet and just surviving and not losing it and having a really negative impact on everyone, building in that stability. And then it's really about that thoughtful, conscious decision of like, how am I actually going to really live life?
Yeah, and it sounds like with that design and that giving back too, that's really about finding a sense of purpose again, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I know that you found a new sense of purpose not long after your marriage broke down, and you are now an endurance athlete. Is that right?
Yeah.
You've always liked sport, but tell us about that part of your life.
Yeah. Look, I'd definitely say an endurance enthusiast. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Rather than athlete.
We can talk you up. That's okay.
No. It's yeah. So for many, many years, like, the whole time we were married and everything, for close to 20 years, I've been involved in an event they have up here called the Island Charity Swim on the Sunshine Coast. That's a swim, for those people that know it, from Majimba Beach around Old Woman Island all the way down to Mooloolaba. It's about 10 kilometres on the wrong side of the shark nets. Yeah. So it's pretty significant, and it raises funds and awareness for the awesome kids and families of the special schools.
Oh.
So I've been involved in that forever. However, certainly it was 2018 and April 2018, and it was like 2 weeks out from what would have been my 10th time of doing that swim, so the 10th year, and wasn't drastically anything wrong with me. However, I was in hospital, and I was stuck there in hospital, and the mum of my boys brought up my sons, and one evening, and things were over between us. It just wasn't documented, and it wasn't officially agreed upon, right? However, cohabitating, separate rooms. Everyone knows the drill. Yeah, or many people do. And and look, I'd take responsibility of of how I'd let that situation unfold. However, it came and sat, and she had like just a trashy magazine. He was just flicking through that, and didn't say a word. And the boys are there, and they're looking at the drip in your arm, and you're explaining everything and all this stuff. Anyway, they left, and I was feeling really sad, and I was sort of really down on myself. I was like, "You dickhead! Like, what have you done? Like, two great kids. That what's about to come around the corner, and it's like, what?" Yeah, that you just think of all the negative effects and the flow on, like all those little things you're going to miss because you're not going to be around that dinner table and sharing it with your kids. There's going to be impacts further down for all the significant moments in that child's in your son's lives, because there'll be some sort of impact with their mum who you're not together with anymore. And then looking at the impacts of other people being invited into their life as well in that close-knit family environment. So I was feeling really down and bad and out and everything. And I was also feeling bummed that I wouldn't get to do that swim in a couple of weeks' time. All I could think of was like, hey, just you got to push some really good stuff out into the community out there, right? And all I could think of was like, push love, like do something really good. And, it was sort of like a self-redemption sort of thing, I would say. And so I made a decision there. I said, you know what? I'm going to get better. I'll, get myself back on track. And I'm going to do that swim 10 times in 10 days to celebrate what would have been me doing it for 10 years. So, yeah. So I went and did a whole 13 sessions in the pool and 3 in the ocean. And then in August, so I set off and I did that 10 times in 10 days. And every day there was like more interaction and more people involved in sort of getting more interest behind it. And I just used that to raise extra funds and to get more people involved in that event. And at the end of that 10 days, it was pretty incredible finishing on that last day. And there's so many experiences through those 10 days as well of different challenges and everything with conditions and that. But yeah, we certainly got a lot of interest at the end of it. And I just made a decision there that, you know what, each year I'm just going to create something a little bit scarier and a little bit more difficult. And I'm going to do that solo endurance thing, and I'm going to keep pushing people into that event and just making sure that no one forgets about these the kids and families of those special schools. So each year, that's what I've done. I've jumped in and I've done something, and I'll just create it myself, and it's a solo endurance thing. And
Middleton, here we come.
Yeah, so it's worked really well, and I've learned so much from it. And like all the people who've done that swim, it's a little bit hard and a little bit tough. Your however many hours it's taking you to do that is pretty insignificant compared to the daily challenges, I guess you would say, around those families and kids that they have. Right. So that really, that really solidified a lot of things in my life. And after doing those 10 days of doing that swim, and I've sort of just ramped that up and really shared, I guess, the learned experiences from that with people individually and with groups to help lift up a bit more of the activity that goes around to helping other people in your own backyard.
Oh, that's so inspirational. And gratitude is so important, isn't it? Purpose, connection to rebuild after hard times.
Yeah. And look, I must admit, my neighbor 2 doors down, when I initially broke up with the boy's mum, he was a doctor, and he's a psychologist, and he's also an awesome long distance runner. He just said to me one day early on, he said, "Come on, you're going for a run." And he just took me out, and we ran out and I'd been into running, however, mostly marathons and stuff like that. He took me out in the bush. And, we ran through the bush. We went through tunnels. We went up really steep hills. We did all this stuff. He's very patient with me in that, and finally got right to the top of, for people who know, sort of past Bald Knob or whatever, it's sort of right up the top of towards Mapleton, Melania, up between there. And just looking back down over the coast early in the morning, all the hinterland below you and the ocean in the distance. And that really did something for me. And so from then on, I just, when I was alone, on a Saturday night and those sorts of times when you're missing your kids and everything, I would just go out running in the bush by myself. And I'd do these like big runs, and you couldn't hide. You can't silence your mind. There's no, you're not taking music or anything with you. It's like, a little bit of fear and, that unknown of running, through the bush at night and
Yeah.
and everything. And, you don't see any people or anything, and you're always hearing lots of noises, and, you've only got your own thoughts there. So, yeah. So for me, and it's not too different from a lot of people who get into any physical sorts of things, after they've had that heartache of breaking up. Yeah, for me, it just helped. It was just part of my repair work because mostly because of the conversations I could have with myself. And, I had to be honest with a lot of things in my life and a lot of behaviors, that I thought, okay, they probably didn't serve me really well. And it was through my lack of being able to address that and talk to someone else, about it and how I felt and what I really wanted out of life. That really held me back. So when I see other men going through a similar thing and they're beating themselves up, or they're just angry or caught up in something, and there's a lot of blame and, shifting that onto another person and, not responding in a way that's completely conscious and going to serve them, I just sort of go, hey, come on, mate, let's have a chat. And let's look at this of, where you want to be rather than, what's happened. And it's not dropping or forgetting or what's happened, because that sort of stuff, as you would know from your experience and with others, when you hold that down inside, that doesn't go away. It just pops up when there's another stressful time in your life.
That's right. And when you're alone with your thoughts, what you're alone with is your own negative perception. And often that's not true. So by talking it out with somebody else, you get another perception, which is often more accurate than the crap that's going on and the false evidence appearing real in your head. And you're connecting at the same time, which releases endorphins. So the real big message, isn't it, is when you've got the propensity to isolate, don't reach out and connect.
Yeah. And look, for me, it's been a learning experience. And and it's taken years, and I'm still figuring things out. Like, even right now, like, this will be the 8th Christmas that have been a single dad. And, the boys are going with their mum, over to Stradbroke Island before Christmas. And, so you won't see them. And that happens, and that's okay. However, typically, I'd organize something a lot better just before Christmas, and we celebrate it like then as a plan to do it. However, I don't know what's gone on this year. I just feel as though I haven't put enough time into that. And and organizing something really good.
Yeah.
And last night we actually did that. That was our night. And, my parents came up, from Brisbane up to the Sunshine Coast, and we all were there together, and it was fantastic. However, I had to pull myself up, and because I know that I felt like I was so far behind in my head what the plan was, that I hadn't prepared really well for it. And so, I spent quite a bit of that time initially just not being present, because I was so concerned
about the what ifs.
I was like, in my head, I wanted to do these other 3 things. And, we had this beautiful like barbecue down the beach, and even getting down there, it was a bit hectic when we left, and I wasn't completely organized. And I get down there and it's like, oh no, I've forgotten the salad. I haven't even got sauce. Like, what the hell's going on? And no bacon. What's going on? And and if you cling to those things, it pulls you out of what you've actually set out to do, which is, get the people you love together and be present and spend time together.
Yeah.
And, that's the way I view the sort of gifts or the things we share together, not so much material things, they're more experience orientated. And so I felt, like I said, I'm still kicking along. Hey, I'm certainly not, don't have this life mastered yet. And I just know that I improve and get better and better, and I become a better person for those around me as well.
And you're doing your best. And the message is, hey, out for anyone out there, at any given time, we give 100% of our capacity, but that looks different on any day, week, or month, depending on what's going on around us. But be kind to yourself, everyone, because, you are doing your best, and that's all we can do. Brendan,
That's
what's your
That's
message?
interesting you said be kind to everyone, because in my head that's exactly the phrase I had.
Oh,
So I'm really, yeah, we're really aligned on that.
I
And
know, right?
it's
Yeah.
true. And I've seen what you've done and listened to you speak for many years. And that is something that you sort of put through all the time, is sort of like, hey, don't take it out on yourself. And that's like most of our needless suffering goes on inside our heads, right? All the things that could or couldn't happen, and the way we speak to ourselves and that internal dialogue.
Tell us how people can contact you.
Yeah, just jump on to my website, brendanjneal.com.
Okay.
Yeah, look up Brendan Neal and
you're happy for
anything
people
there.
to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. You can contact me directly there. Yeah, and for guys who are searching for something there, on Saturday mornings I work out of a clinic that has a whole heap of psychologists and counsellors in there. Awesome. And that's at Maroochydore, and where I do face-to-face things. So anyone who's outside of that region, no problem. We can catch up on a screen or on a call. However, on a Saturday morning, if you don't have your kids or whatever, and just reach out through there, and definitely, would love to help out.
That's great. And if anyone is listening to this and really struggling and needs immediate support, Lifeline on 131114. And as we close, Brendan, what's your message for the world?
I would have to say it's not an original thought. This is something I've heard other people mention. Your internal dialogue, just treat yourself as though you're speaking to a best friend or someone you really care and love. So similar to be kind to yourself. Just really, really have a listen to the language you're using inside, and know that, hey, you can just pick one foot up and take a step forward, followed by the other. It will come over time. It's just these small little habits that you get into place, and a little conscious direction. Sometimes you may need someone to help point you in that direction, or shine a light on a particular area. However, it's there and it'll come. And really, especially if you're feeling a bit dark and down, do reach out to those professionals like a Lifeline or something, because that's a big part of, why I concentrate on the men part, is because, that statistic's pretty horrific of men just checking out. Yeah. And, so really, regardless of how down and alone you feel, there are people that would really love to help you in this world. And, I can guarantee that once the fog sort of lifts and burns off, that there is a bright future for all of us.
Oh, thank you so much, Brendan. It's been an absolute honour, and it's been such an important discussion today. And you truly are one of the awesome men in this world. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you for listening to Stories of Hope with Kerry Atherton. If this conversation helped you, please consider sharing the podcast with a friend or leaving a rating and review on your podcast player. If you'd like to find out more about Kerry Atherton, head to storiesofhope.com.au, where you can purchase her books or find her next event. Check the show notes for links and information about our guest in this episode, and remember, you don't have to walk your path alone.